Hello, and welcome to my channel. My name is Jonathan Cohn, and today I have a book review of the book of Wizards and Wolves, which is an anthology in memorial of David Farland, the well-known fantasy science fiction author, and it was edited by Lisa Mangum, who is an editor and has edited several other short story collections and has also edited several novels. So, this book came about because we tragically lost the wonderful fantasy science fiction writer David Farland in January of last year, and it was a complete shock to the community. And David Farland, when it comes to novels, is most known for two things. He's most known under his other name, Dave Wolverton, for writing The Courtship of Princess Leia for Star Wars, but he also wrote one of my favorite series. In fact, really, it's my favorite magic system and one of my favorite villains, but one of my favorite series, the Rune Lords. And so that was what he became under the name David Farland. So that's what he became known for. And he also was known for mentoring a lot of authors. He was a teacher at BYU for several years, and then he also eventually started his own webinars and workshops teaching people how to write. And he touched hundreds of authors in the community. I mean, it's incredible how many people he either taught at the school or taught through his webinars. And so the way this anthology works is all the proceeds from it go to a scholarship under David Farland's name to help new authors be able to go to the Superstars Writing Conference. And I just think that is a superb use of the money. I think that is a very good way to honor both David Farland and also have something to do with the book and give it purpose. So I like that aspect of it. And most of the authors who write the short stories here, there's a total of 19 short stories. Most of the authors present are not big-name authors. They're people that some of them have written maybe a novel or two. All of them have written short stories and novellas before, but most of them are not household names. They're not your big-name fantasy authors. And so this was smaller scale people writing short stories. And the topics of these short stories were wizards and wolves, as the title would suggest. It's very focused on those because that was something that David Farland himself really focused on in his novels, particularly in the Rune Lords. You have wizard-type characters, and you also have a lot of wolves present. One of his books literally is called Brotherhood of the Wolf. So it was a very important part of world building to him. And so in this short story collection, you have some of the short stories are just about wizards, and some of them are just about wolves, and some of them kind of combine the two, which is actually quite cool, the way they do it. And there were some short stories that were superb and excellent. There were some that were fine, and then there were some that were, I'm sorry to say it, boring. But that happens in quite a lot of short story collections. So short story collections rarely can be judged as a whole, because it's like, well, I liked this and didn't like this and hated this and loved this, and there's so much range that you have to say, how much did this good stuff work for you, and how much did the bad stuff actually detract from the storytelling? And because of that, it's kind of a mixed review. I still very much value Wordfire Press, which is the publisher of Kevin J. Anderson that he owns. I appreciate them and Lisa Mangum, who edited this, for putting this together, because I think it's very valuable and has importance, but unfortunately not every story is entertaining. But as I said, that is to be expected. I'll talk about the ones I loved the most in a moment. So those were a lot of fun, and I'll briefly explain why I loved them. There are stories set in all types of world buildings. There are stories set in an original fantasy universe. There's stories set in our current world that just happen to have wizards. Some are like our world but changed a lot. There's even a science fiction world used here. And the final short story is actually a David Farland short story called Barbarians, which is a prequel to his Runelords universe. And so if you have never read that short story before, it was previously published in some other collection about a decade ago. But as far as I know, it's not in print anymore. The only place you could find it is an ebook. So if you want a print version of that short story, this is the perfect place to get it. It's kind of expensive if you just want a short story. I believe there is actually a paperback. They did a hardcover and paperback at the same time. But if you want that short story, this is where to find it. And it's a short, all the short stories are under 20 pages. They're all between about 12 and 18 is about the average. I don't think there were any that went lower or higher. It was about 12 to 18 pages on average. And because of that, it reads pretty quickly. And if you're not feeling one of the short stories, you can just move on to the next. And there's some fun ones, some sad ones, some hilarious ones, some wacky ones. There's all types of short stories. So to briefly discuss the ones that stood out the most to me, and again, I'm going to be very brief and I'm not going to give too much spoilers. The first story is called Magic Hands by Storm Humbert, and that one kicks off the anthology on a very somber note. It is about a man whose family is involved in magic, and the father is dying, and they have been arguing over how to use the magic, and it's about saying goodbye to the father. And it is a tragic, sad story, but is really well done. The second story I'll talk about is complete opposite tone, and it is called The Pun-Stoppable Catfish Stanley by Becca Lee Gardner. The Pun-Stoppable. You know exactly what you're getting when you read this short story. Yes, it is a funny short story. It is pun-filled. In fact, the magic system of this short story is pun-based. Characters save other characters by telling puns. That is brilliant. As a pun person, I love that. I think that's hilarious. And so I really enjoyed that short story. There's a short story called Silver Sentinels by Jen Bear, which is kind of like a short story set in high school. It felt almost like it could have been like a high school musical type short story. It felt like it could have been on the Disney Channel, is what I'm trying to say. It was sweet. It was kind of cheesy, but it was nice to read. It was very nice to read, with a good message. That one's good if you have kids. Kids might enjoy that one. The next one is called Which Wolf Will You Feed by Tanya Hales. It is a story about a girl who has 3 wolves. Each of them has a different aspect of personality, and she is instructed to choose between the 3 wolves. It is a bit predictable of a short story, but man, does it pack an emotional punch to you. Because you don't want to hurt the wolves, because if she picks one and the other 2 will die, it's kind of sad. Then you have the short story Peace on the Argent by J.J. Lynn Daniels, which is a science fiction werewolf short story with a pretty sweet message. It's kind of a coming-age short story. When I was reading it, it kind of reminded me of like Red Rising, but on a lighter tone, or like a Hunger Games. Like it kind of had that tone to it, that YA tone, while at the same time really feeling a unique universe. It was a science fiction universe with fantasy-type world-building about wolves. So, I should say werewolves. Then I have the short story Of Wolves and Wives by Mel Todd, which was a sad story about a man who's slowly losing his wife, whose mind is slowly going, and she has some an element of magic to her that I don't want to spoil. She has an element of magic, and it is really sad for him. And you feel his pain and her pain at what's happening. And because that story, the first story, this is the last original short story for this collection. The first story and that last story of Wizards and Wives really bookend the book and really point out how sad it is to lose a loved one. And especially when there's sometimes where it's all of a sudden, and there's sometimes where it's slowly and painfully. And it just tells a wonderful, sweet story, and it really makes you feel for the Farland or the Wolverton family, and makes you really sad that we lost such a great author. But as I mentioned, the absolute final source story is one that was previously written back in 2013 by David Farland himself, entitled Barbarians. This short story is like a prequel to his Runelords universe, but from the get-go, reading this short story, because this is David Farland, you know it's an excellent short story, and it also sets things up as like this could have been like chapter 1 of a book series for like a prequel series, a prequel trilogy or something, and it was delightful and so much fun, and his descriptions of the wildlife and his style and his way of making you connect with the characters and the magic system without the magic system being too over the top, or without his characters being too cheesy, or without his descriptions being too onerous. Like, he just has this way of writing, or he had this way of just writing rich stories that just captivated me and made me realize, man, I want to reread the Rune Lord series soon, because it's just so good. His writing style is just superb, just right for me. So those were the 7 short stories that really stood out to me, the ones that I thought were the most impactful and best and funniest, although there were like 12 short stories that I just didn't talk about now, but there were some good ones in there that were just fine, but those 7 really were what stood out. Now, I do have some criticism and some praise to give out. First of all, this cover, gorgeous cover. For how little a budget they probably had for this book, they did a great job on the cover. I appreciate it. That's supposed to be David Farland, and it looks so clean. Not a big fan of how they did the back, where they put the images of previous short story collections. They should have either filled up the whole page or just left it blank. Or really what I would have done is put little sections about each of the short stories. I think that would have been a better design. But I thought that this was a fine cover, front cover at least. I will also say that I appreciate that they gave author bios after each short story, so that if you really liked one of the short stories, you could check out more books from that author. That was really well done. But I do have 2 major criticisms, and both of these criticisms, I believe, stem from how I think the book should have been produced, and there may have been like a mandate that they couldn't do this or weren't able to do this, in which case I totally understand and don't blame them for it, but I just thought there is a way to make this a much better collection and make it more marketable, and there's a way to make it so that A, more people will buy it, B, more people will talk about it, and C, more people will want to be engaged with it and add it to their collection. So there's ways to do that. And the first way, I think, would have been to set all of the short stories in the Rune Lords universe. If they had all had the mandate that you can tell an original story that you want and spread out. I mean, the Rune Lords map is huge, and so much of it is unexplored. And if they had been like, all right, each of you takes a different country and takes a different time period of the Rune Lords history, and you get to tell a little short story there, I think the authors would have had a lot of freedom to do that, but it would have really made the book more appealing to mass audiences, and I think would have made the Rune Lords fandom feel the need to buy this, because it's just a single short story from the Rune Lords in here, and the fact that that was a previously published short story. This book doesn't have the enough, I think, to get more casual fans to want to buy this. And you need to give them the reason, because we want this book to make money, because we want to help out the scholarship. So I think that was a missed opportunity. Now, again, I don't know whether it was the David Farland estate, or whether it was the publisher, Wordfire, or whether it was Tor, who publishes the Rune Lords books. I don't know what was keeping them from potentially doing that, but I think that was an unfortunate mistake that they made. The second thing that I think they could have done is gotten bigger names to be a part of this. David Farland influenced some of the biggest names in science fiction and fantasy. He influenced Brandon Sanderson, Dan Wells, Brandon Mull. Depending on who you ask, he influenced Stephanie Meyer. He has all of these famous authors that he influenced. Big sellers, people who draw attention to things. And had you gotten some of them, I think that might have, and you could meme like this is a memorial anthology for an author that we all loved and a mentor that we all loved. So we got all these big authors to show you just how vast his influence truly was, that type of thing. I think this would have been able to generate more attention and sell more copies and that type of thing. But as it is, the current short story collection, these authors, I think that this is a good way to get these authors some exposure. But the fact that it's almost entirely smaller time authors, it doesn't do them too much exposure because it's not bringing in an audience. If you had probably out of the 19 short stories, if like 5 of them were major authors, like top-selling, best-selling authors, and then the other 12 or 13 were original, new smaller time authors, those big time authors would bring in the audience, and then that big audience would get to experience the small time authors as well. So it would have expanded those smaller time authors' potential audience. Instead, because it's almost all smaller time authors, it just doesn't. It doesn't give them a lot more people because they're probably not going to sell as many copies with that. So that's I was very harsh in the criticism here because I think that this could have been a much more successful short story collection. But I still really enjoyed it. And if you are one of the authors who contributed to this collection, there are several authors, I won't mention which ones in particular, that I actually want to go check out their novels and novellas and short stories now. So you were at least a little bit successful there. And also, I believe that there will be other people like me who did buy the book that will be interested. So I think it's still worth it that those authors contributed to this. I just think it could have been managed a much better way. That's just my opinion on this book. If you've read this book, let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. If you're a big David Farland fan, talk to me about your favorite David Farland novels, or as Wolverton for science fiction, your favorite Dave Wolverton books. Let me know all those thoughts in the comments section down below. And until next time, I'm Jonathan, and thank you for watching.